McLaren could have won the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix, and the Monaco Grand Prix, and the Canadian Grand Prix, and the Spanish Grand Prix, and the Austrian Grand Prix, and the British Grand Prix. You get the picture. The point is that McLaren's strike rate since emerging as a genuine Formula 1 frontrunner has been poor. It has just one victory in 2024, taken by Lando Norris in Miami with the assistance of the safety car and Max Verstappen's damage. The McLaren is now a strong car. It's not necessarily the outright fastest, given that when the Red Bull is able to run in a narrow window where the RB20 is at its best, it is probably quicker. But you can make a case that the McLaren is the best car, given its all-round strength. However, the team and its drivers have come in for increasing criticism for squandering potential victories. So is it fair to say McLaren has been wasting F1's best car? Well, to understand that, let's work our way through the races it's perceived to have thrown away. Norris chased Max Verstappen home in the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix at Imola. In the last 20 laps, he closed a gap of 7.4 seconds to cross the line just under 3/4 of a second behind. Imola was all about track position, and Norris never got close enough to launch an attack in the race. Despite getting a better initial launch, he lost out in the second phase of the start, so was behind. With Verstappen struggling with his hard compound front tyres and McLaren having no such trouble, Norris was faster, but felt he needed another lap or two to make a pass. Things might have been different had qualifying played out differently. Oscar Piastri actually qualified second, but was relegated 3 places on the grid for impeding Kevin Magnussen, while Norris was third. Given Verstappen gained half a tenth from a tow from Nico Hülkenberg in qualifying, it could easily have gone the other way. McLaren certainly could have won at Imola, but it was hardly a race thrown away. Verdict: winnable, but not squandered. While Ferrari dominated the Monaco weekend, the McLarens were right up there in a 4-car battle for the lead. It's unrealistic to expect Piastri, who finished second to Charles Leclerc, to have passed the Ferrari driver on track. The early red flag also wiped out any strategic opportunity to do so. However, the tantalising what-if was in qualifying. There, Piastri's ideal lap, made up by combining his 3 best sectors, was actually 0.07 of a second quicker than Leclerc's pole time. So, Piastri could have been on pole position, and that also shows Norris had the machinery to be as well. Had the McLaren started at the front, it would have stayed there. Verdict: qualifying perfection required. An ultra-tight qualifying session, with Norris qualifying third but only 21 thousandths of a second down, suggests pole position might have been possible, particularly with McLaren's prodigious pace in the middle sector. However, that proved irrelevant, as Norris's strong first stint meant that he took the lead from George Russell on lap 21. When the safety car was deployed for Logan Sargent's crash on lap 25, Norris's lead over Verstappen, who had also passed Russell, was over 10 seconds. But with race control waiting before deploying the safety car, as Sargent was unsuccessfully attempting to restart the car, it wasn't called until Norris was around 300 metres from the pit entry. He stayed out, was picked up by the safety car while the chasers, who had pitted, were driving to the fastest safety car delta time, and came out of the pits a lap later in third, behind Verstappen and Russell. McLaren team principal Andrea Stella admitted that in hindsight, Norris should have been given an instruction to pit if the safety car was deployed. While he was only about 300 metres from the pit entry when the safety car was activated, Norris could easily have dived in and therefore held the lead. Instead, McLaren didn't make the conditional call because of the variables at play. While in the dry conditions that prevailed in the final stint of the race, the McLaren wasn't quite so quick. Had Norris made that stop and therefore held the lead, there's every chance he would have won. Verdict: bad call, cost likely win. Norris was perfectly set up for victory in Spain after taking his first pole position of the season, but the race turned on the start. Despite Norris unceremoniously shoving the fast-starting Verstappen towards the grass, the Red Bull got ahead. Norris also, very wisely, had to back out of it entering turn 1 to avoid being sandwiched between Verstappen and Russell, who swept around the outside of both to lead. McLaren was surprised by how early its rivals pitted at such a high degradation track, and stuck with what was always its strategy plan and ran longer. But as Stella said, the time lost early on was costly. However, Norris was able to come back at Verstappen in the final stint, despite losing a second to a slightly slow final stop. Both were on softs, but Norris ran out of laps and finished just over 2 seconds behind. After the race, Norris was kicking himself about the bad start that he felt cost him victory, but ultimately McLaren felt that the race pace versus Red Bull was very similar. Verdict: winnable, but not clear-cut. The Austrian Grand Prix weekend was a strange one. Norris briefly took the lead of the sprint race, only to lose it again immediately after making what he called the amateur mistake of not defending the inside at turn 4. But in qualifying for the main race, Verstappen was on another level and on pole position by 0.4 of a second. He also had a comfortable lead in the race until a slow final pit stop allowed Norris to exit the pits just behind him. Verstappen was on used mediums compared to Norris's fresh set, and the Red Bull driver also suffered a lock-up at turn 4 on his outlap. This turned the final stint into a dogfight. It all ended when Norris attacked on the outside into turn 3 on lap 61. Verstappen moved over on Norris, with the light contact throwing the Red Bull's left rear tyre off the rim and the secondary clash giving both damage. While Norris has subsequently eased his criticisms, he accused Verstappen of being desperate in defence. Had Norris been able to make a clean pass, he would certainly have won on the road. That he didn't was down to a combination of Verstappen's obstinance and perhaps the need for more strategic attacks on Norris's part. However, he also had a 5-second penalty for repeated track limits offences, so perhaps this was a win that was lost on 2 counts. Verdict: a missed opportunity for Norris. Either Norris or Piastri could have won the British Grand Prix, and one of them certainly should have. That they didn't is the most obvious example of McLaren throwing away a victory, likely even a 1-2 finish. The first strategic error came when it was time to switch from slick to intermediate tyres at the end of the first stint. Norris and Piastri were running first and second, having passed the 2 Mercedes drivers when the rain first hit. But when Norris pitted at the end of lap 27, Piastri behind stayed out. By the time he dived into the pits at the end of lap 28, Norris was right behind him. And while Piastri was polite after the race in calling this strategy a joint call, it was McLaren who told him to stay out. He also said that double stacking was the better call with hindsight, but frankly it was obvious at the time, as Mercedes proved by doing just that on the same lap. The time lost meant Piastri was out of contention, going on to finish 4th, so it was all on Norris. He had control in the middle stint, but McLaren allowed both Lewis Hamilton and Verstappen to pit before him and gain a 1-lap undercut. That in itself was recoverable, but the decision to put Norris onto used softs was baffling. He was the only driver in that lead battle who had a fresh set of the optimum tyre, the medium, left. Had he taken that medium set, there's every chance he could have fought his way past Hamilton, having dropped to 2nd, rather than being overtaken by hard-shot Verstappen and finishing 3rd. Verdict: strategic blunders cost victory. Of the 6 races we've looked at, McLaren could indeed have won all of them, but it's only at Silverstone that McLaren can legitimately be said with certainty to have thrown away a guaranteed victory. That confirms that strategically it needs to sharpen up. The failure to give Norris an instruction in Canada to pit if a safety car is deployed is further proof of that. But what's also concerning is that McLaren failed to convert any of the races we've called winnable. Imola, Monaco, Canada, Spain and Austria all fall into that category. Races where McLaren had the speed potentially to win but didn't manage to make it stick. The drivers also play their part in that, notably Norris in Austria. Ultimately, this is all part of the learning process for the team. It now has a car to fight for victory at most, if not all, tracks. What it must do now is sharpen up operationally to ensure it makes the most of that opportunity. Winning the Constructors' Championship is still possible this season, particularly if Red Bull driver Sergio Perez's poor form continues. But the second half of the season also presents the ideal opportunity to iron out those kinks, much the same as Red Bull itself had to back in 2009 and 10 when it was learning how to win consistently. McLaren must learn from the pain of these lost wins to become battle-hardened enough to go toe-to-toe with Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari in 2025.